Amen. Thank you, Rachel. Good morning. So, who here likes Notting Hill? Yeah, well, the big question, the bigger question really, isn't it? I think the question that really bothers most people in the world is Die Hard a Christmas movie? I think it is. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Notting Hill definitely is. But there's all the other comedy, all the things as well, Four Weddings and a Funeral, and Love Actually, that's what I'm thinking. Love Actually is the proper one, isn't it? That's the Christmas one. But this is a bit like that, because this is the part of Ruth when they get together. But before we get there, I need to talk to you about organic carrots, and also about bananas and about crisps, because there are an awful lot over. Deborah's going to wave. There's quite a lot that's to spare over there. Please don't go empty-handed. But let's get back to Ruth. It's week 3 of Ruth today, and the story so far. Well, Naomi has returned to Bethlehem after 10 years. And she ran away from famine to Moab, but whilst there, disaster struck. She lost her husband and both her sons. And Ruth, her widowed daughter-in-law, comes back with her. And they were both starving. So Ruth went to pick up grain in a field where she met Ross Poldark. He was called Boaz, but better looking and kinder with nicer hair. And Boaz was kind to her, and they both fell in love, or fell for each other. But in the immortal words of Kajagoogoo, they were too shy to do anything about it. And today is the bit we've all been waiting for. It's the bit where they get together. But this is more than just a love story. Ruth has got a powerful message. Ruth 3 especially, a powerful message about humility. And how you deal with rules and how you deal with laws. So here's a question for you. Who here is humble?
Really humble.
Really humble. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I can't wait to look in the mirror because I get better looking each day. Now, I try to be humble, but I'm not very good at it. Mind you, though, by accepting that I'm not very good at being humble, that kind of makes me a bit humble, doesn't it? I'm quite proud of that. Oh, there I go again, downhill. Down the slide I go. Or actually, it's down the snake, really, isn't it? The snake of pride and the snake of sin. Because I reckon that proud people sin an awful lot more than humble ones. Now, someone once said to me that humble people don't really know they're humble. Well, that's actually complete rubbish, because being humble is not about ignorance. It isn't just about being not proud either. It's much, much worse than that. Being humble is just plain hard work. Now, it's so easy to fall in love, isn't it? But staying in love for 10, 20, 30 or more years takes real effort, doesn't it? Humility is just the same. You have to work at it. You have to own your pride, own your selfishness, and all that stuff, and constantly, day by day, deal with it. Every minute of every hour of every day. You find humility hard, well then don't worry, it is. It's really difficult, and it hurts. That's why it's so hard. So, what is humility, this thing I'm talking about? Well, in a biblical sense, Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. Probably, I think, the best definition of humility there is. To be humble is to put yourself second and to accept you don't have all the answers. Or Philippians 2:3 puts it like this. If you put others' needs first and don't do things out of ambition or try to look good, then you're kind of on the road to being humble. There's a very famous Indian missionary called Sundar Singh in the early 20th century. And he toured around Europe. And he was treated like a celebrity. And someone once asked him, doesn't it affect your humility? You're getting so much honour and attention. And he answered, no. You see, the donkey went into Jerusalem. And they put dark garments on the ground for him. He wasn't proud. He knew it wasn't to honour him. It's for Jesus who was sitting on his back. When people honour me, I know it's not me, but the Lord who does the job. You see, to be humble is to know your place. It's to know your place before God. Proverbs 22:4 says this, humility is fear of the Lord. When God comes into the room, you get out of the way. Jesus knew his place. Jesus was king of the universe. But he came Not to serve, but to be served. Rather than the other way, not just to be served, but to serve. Graham Kendrick getting into my head there. He said that he could achieve nothing at all by himself. He needed God the Father, John 5:19. And Jesus is a perfect example of humility. But it's quite a mountain to climb to be like Jesus. Let's start a bit lower, shall we? With someone like you, someone like me. When you read about a person who's truly humble, then it gives you a goal, a place to head for. It doesn't make it easier, but at least you know where you're going. And that's where Ruth and Boaz come in, helped out by a very, very wise woman called Naomi. Now, Naomi knows that Boaz fancies Ruth, and that Ruth feels quite the same about him. And it's not lost on her that Boaz holds the key to both hers and Ruth's security. But Naomi's also worked out that Boaz is completely useless, and he is never ever going to take matters into his own hands. Well, in fact, he says so himself. He thinks he's far too old and not good looking enough for her. And they didn't do leap years in ancient Israel, so Ruth can't ask him either. This wasn't a done thing. But Naomi realises that unless she does something, the two of them will just carry on forever, stargazing across the barley field into each other's eyes, trying to avoid Theresa May in the middle. So Naomi comes up with a plan. Now, on the surface of it, it looks quite devious. Dress up nicely, go and slip into his bed at night. Is she trying to seduce him? There's a story in the Bible of how a woman called Tamar dresses up as a prostitute to get pregnant by Judah and force him to marry her. But that is not what is happening here. This is far, far more innocent. This is simply a story of two very shy and two very humble people dancing around their feelings to each other. Both of them humbly claiming their own rights, rights enshrined in the law of the land. They're hesitant to be selfish. There is no deviousness. There's no deception here. So Ruth gets dressed up. She goes down to the farm where Boaz is working. This is not a place where women should normally go. It's a factory, a rough place with rough language, and a place where if Ruth were caught, she would be in dreadful danger. Even in broad daylight, Naomi had warned her not to stray too far from the other women. Yet here she was, telling her to go to the most dangerous place you could possibly imagine, dressed up to the nines as well. And the stakes were really, really high. But for the two women, it was the only chance they had. And I think Naomi must have known that Boaz would treat Ruth honourably. She'd never have sent her if she wasn't sure. For Naomi, as we found out in previous weeks, she was beginning to learn to trust God and to trust his plans, that he was in control. So there we have Ruth, watching from her dark corner. Boaz lies down at the far end of the grain pile. He's got a bit of privacy, which is quite good for Ruth. And Ruth waits in the shadows until Boaz falls asleep, creeps over, lifts the coat, and lies at Boaz's feet. Now, despite what you might think, there is nothing at all sexual going on here. It's so tempting to see all this through 21st century eyes and everything's about sex. But that is not what's happening here. And you'll miss the point entirely if that's how you see things. For this passage is about innocence and humility. It's not about sex and power. Now, the Bible isn't shy about sex. And if it wants to tell you a story about lust, then it will do so. Remember King David and Bathsheba? If he wants to get graphic about a woman trying to get away with a man, then it will tell you the story straight, just like it did with Judah and Tamar. But that is not what's going on here. This is much more innocent and gentle. If you bring in lust and sex, you not only spoil the story, but you miss the point. For this is not a story of lust and revenge and power. It's not a story about dominance and deception. It's a story of honesty, gentleness and respect. For there is Ruth, lying at Boaz's feet, in the place of submission. And then it all happens. Now, I guess lots of schoolboys fantasize about finding a strange woman at the bottom of the bed. But bang! Boaz wakes up, and there's a real live one right at his feet. How is this going to play out? Ruth has risked everything on this one encounter. She was a foreigner, she was a widow, and up until now, a respected one. But that could change in an instant if Boaz was not the man she thought that he was. Everything rests, everything, on his reaction. Boaz doesn't even know who it is. It's far too dark. But he does know that it's a woman by the smell of her perfume. Clever old Naomi. Who are you? Surprise, it's Ruth! Ruth is not deferential anymore. She's respectful, as she is. But she speaks in her own right. Spread the corner of your garment over me. Now that's actually quite a weird thing to say, because she's already under the cloak at this point. But that isn't what she means. But Ruth is reminding Boaz of a promise that he made to her in chapter 2, verse 12, where Boaz says, "May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Back then, Boaz said that Ruth was now one of God's people, one of Boaz's people. And Ruth is now asking him to honour that, claiming her right to be part of Boaz's family. But see, what's lovely about this is that wing and blanket, they're the same word in Hebrew. Spread the corner of your blanket over me means take me under your wing. I'm reminding you, Boaz, says Ruth, that you said that I'm now a part of your family. You have a responsibility towards me and towards Naomi. She might as well have said, "Will you marry me?" But Boaz doesn't hesitate. Wow! He says, "Why do you want me? You're noble and young and amazing. But wow, yes, of course, blimey." And then that's it. They both go back to sleep. This isn't Hollywood, where there'd have been all sorts of rumpy-pumpy under the sheets now they've got together. That's not what happens. Ruth stays at his feet and waits until morning, as it's light enough to see her way home and still dark enough not to be seen. They're kind of like two teenagers creeping around, hoping their parents don't see. This is a really different love story. Now, usually love stories go something like this. Boy meets girl, they fall in love. Then she finds out he's from a different group or class or something. He's a Montague. Come on. Romeo and Juliet. Or a Jet. West Side Story, well done. Or a Muslim. Suitable boy. Or lower class, Dirty Dancing. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. And then what happens is they either run away together, or one of them dies or gets consumption, and then they get into a fight or something, and then sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But in most stories, it's the law or the customs of the land that keep them apart. But with Boaz and Ruth, it's the law and God that brings them together. For you see, it's God's plan for them to become King David's great-grandparents, and he uses his own law to make it happen. But this is much, much more than just a love story. This is God's plan to bring together two people to start a line that would lead to Israel's greatest ever king and the greatest time in their nation. And this king needed to have the right qualities if he was going to be trusted with God's special nation. You see, God did not want Israel to have a king in the first place. God, was their king. And Samuel warned the Israelites what would happen if they had an earthly king. He would rule over them, take their land, take their daughters. But as 1 Samuel 8 tells us, the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us, go out before us and fight our battles. And so God gave them a king. But he needed to be sure that the king would not abuse his power. This king needed to be a man after God's own heart. And that's why his grandparents had to have hearts of gold. They needed to be upright and moral and humble. If the king was going to interpret God's laws in a kind and just way, not in a selfish and power-grabbing way, then he needed to be taught that way, brought up that way. And that's where Ruth and Boaz come in. Their courtship is just like a dance to the laws and customs of the land. Every time they have a choice of whether to interpret the laws and customs in a selfish way or in a humble and generous way, they do the right thing. Now, I saw a post on Facebook the other day from someone who was boasting about how he'd insisted on his right away in his car in a country lane. He made an old woman who couldn't reverse very well go backwards for 100 yards. It took her ages, and he was laughing at her the whole time and then boasted about it afterwards on Facebook. Now the thing is, he had a right to do that. He had a right to make a reverse and to insist on his right of way, but he shouldn't have done that. Of course he shouldn't. And Boaz had the right to take Ruth, whether she liked it or not. But he didn't. When he finds Ruth at his feet, he covers her, tells her she's noble, and is completely stunned that she would look at him, an older man. And Ruth, well, she has the right to glean in Boaz's field, but she asks, she says, please. Boaz has a duty to allow her to do this, but he gives her more, he protects her. Ruth has the right to ask Boaz to marry her, but it takes someone else to make her do that. And even then, she gives him the opportunity to say no. She lay at his feet, offering all that she had to him, land and all. She knew that he could take it, but she offered it anyway. He was touched by Ruth offering herself to him. She didn't come humbly as a servant or someone downtrodden. She came as someone whose head was high, because she had the right to ask to be redeemed. But she did it humbly. These two wonderful, wonderful people are so reluctant to insist on their rights. They seem hesitant about taking what's rightfully theirs. And here were two people brought together by the law of God, who both interpreted this law in the most gentle of ways. He didn't try to force her, she didn't try to trap him. Two perfect role models for a king. A king has huge power, and so many kings become brutal and power mad, especially in that time. And God wanted a king who exercised authority with restraint, who followed the law of God, even when it didn't suit him. Now, David was not a perfect king, but he was always described as a man after God's heart. How could he be anything else with humble grandparents like Boaz and Ruth? The story of a young American student who once went to the Beethoven Museum in Bonn. And she asked if she could play just a few bars on the piano on which Beethoven composed his greatest works. She offered a huge tip as well, so the guard said yes. She went, sat down on the piano, played the opening of the Moonlight Sonata. As she was leaving, she said to the guard, I suppose all the great pianists who come here want to play on that piano. And the guard shook his head. Paderewski is a famous Polish pianist. He was here a few years ago, and he said he wasn't worthy to touch it. Ruth and Boaz, they set the tone. They started a family culture that produced the greatest king Israel had ever had. So never, ever, ever doubt how awesomely powerful it is to be humble. If you want to know God, if you want to become a man, if you want to become a woman after God's own heart, then look for Jesus and follow his humble, humble path. And where do you look for Jesus? Where is he? Well, there he is, I can see him. See, comes your king, gentle, humble, riding on a donkey. Amen. As the band come up, let's pray, shall we? Lord Jesus, sometimes we can feel separated from you. Sometimes we can feel as if there's a massive chasm between us. And Lord, we know that sometimes you're far away. But Lord, that gap can be filled by you as we look humbly on you as our great King. Lord, teach us the way of humility. Teach us the way to put ourselves second, to trust in you, and to follow your path, even when it doesn't seem like the right thing to do. Lord, teach us to be humble. And Lord, as we become humble and follow your foolish ways, Lord, grant us the privilege of meeting you.